That's interesting because I didn't know the book existed, and I probably never would have. The movie was so compelling that I thought, oh, what's the real story?
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Director of Marketing. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. So, Andrew, part 2 of what to see in the theaters, or
No.
not, or part
No.
2 of talk about movies.
You know, Anthony Esolen, who is an author I greatly respect,
Mhm.
he is perhaps more negative about modern movies than anyone. And I believe at one time he posted on his Facebook,
Mhm.
any movie made before 1960 is
Mm.
better than any movie made after.
Oh, well,
So he's a huge fan of the old ones, Humphrey Bogart, I guess, in those days. I think, you know, for me, the movies go back to my childhood.
Mhm.
Those are the oldest ones I
Mhm.
can actually know about, and I know this is one of your favorites,
Mhm.
and that's The Sound of Music, of
Love that
course.
movie. Mhm.
I was very interested at one point to read the book.
Mm.
It's the
Von Trapp.
Trapp Family Singers, I
Mhm.
believe. It's written by one of the girls.
Mm.
Of course, there were some significant differences in the way things actually came down. Movies have to be engineered for,
Mhm.
you know, maybe a little more suspense, or they have to shrink time
Mhm.
sometimes, so there's a distortion there. The overall spirit of the movie seemed to capture the overall spirit of the book. And I think that's what you have to look at when you're
Right.
comparing books and movies. So, you know, that would be probably a movie along with The Wizard of Oz
Mm.
that we watched every year. Before, there was even VHS tapes. You're old enough to remember this.
Of course I am.
We couldn't just watch a movie unless it was in a theater
Mhm.
or unless it was on television.
With lots of commercials and
And
shortened
yes.
significantly.
And so there were certain movies that I
Mhm.
believe they played every year
Right.
because people would look forward to this.
Mhm.
And I remember every year we would watch The Wizard of Oz
Mhm.
and Sound of Music. And so those are very deeply ingrained from my childhood movie watching memory.
And the Charlie Brown movies that we
The
see every
Charlie
year.
Brown and then there were probably a couple Disney films that
Mhm.
were on the Disney Channel, and you could see those multiple times. I remember seeing Fantasia
Yes.
in the theater
Yes.
and knowing a lot of the music. My mother brilliantly got the records and played the music.
Mhm.
And then when I saw the movie, you know, it was much more engaging.
Right.
And then, of course, I think Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you know, some of those, I would probably not watch them now, nor would I want to even subject my grandchildren to too many Disney films.
Well, and you know, you talk about the older movies. I think of Lawrence of Arabia
Oh, yeah.
and
Yep.
the pace of
Yes.
that movie is unbelievably slow. I just can't even stand it.
You know, it's interesting because you can make a comparison between old books
Mhm.
and old movies
Mhm.
versus new books and new movies.
Mhm.
So in these old movies, they'd give you 2 minutes of scenery,
Yes.
right? Of just the train going slowly and the beautiful mountains in the back and the music and people must have liked that, I guess, maybe because they didn't, you know, they were stuck in a city. They never got to see the mountains or whatever.
Right.
You never get away with that
No.
in a movie today.
No.
2 minutes of just scenery. It'd be like,
Yes.
what is this?
Yes.
Everything in a modern movie has to be tightly connected.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the effort, I guess, to engage the more modern mind. Books are kind of the same way. If you go back and read old books,
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned Dickens in the
Mhm.
last episode. Dickens and Melville and Bronte and authors of that time period, they would spend paragraphs, pages, just describing a scene.
Right.
They would take 3 chapters of the beginning of the book before you got even a hint of what was a possible problem or
Mhm.
situation.
Right.
Well, modern readers just don't have the tolerance for that. And they're raised up on books that are written, they call it the young adult market, but they're written to like grab kids on the first page.
Yep.
So they'll read it and keep them reading to the last page and then start the next problem at the end of that book. So they'll buy the next book in the
Right.
series.
Yep.
And so this commercial drive to meet the, shorter attention spans of modern people.
I have once heard that shorter attention span, true or not, can be attributed to Sesame Street, because the segments on Sesame Street are 20 seconds, and they just keep flipping to segment. So there we go.
Yeah, I think
Sesame Street generation.
there's a lot. I think you might be able to trace it back to that, and then
Mhm.
probably some other things. Certainly the whole idea of commercials,
Mm-hmm.
of what would you call it? Disintegrated information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if someone wrote A Tale of Two Cities today,
Right.
would anyone publish it and would anyone buy it? Maybe, maybe not, but it certainly, has the power it has today because Dickens wrote it, 100 and few dozen years ago or whenever, and it's a classic. So we all
Yes.
trust that.
Yes.
But if you had to pick up Tale of Two Cities and slog through the first 4 chapters today, I don't know if anyone would do that.
Without believing that this was a classic and worth
Exactly.
reading. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Just kind of fresh.
So, which is one reason why we need to raise children with classics, with the good and great books so that they have the capacity to read because, of course, the story it's profoundly moving. A
Yes.
Tale of Two Cities.
Yes.
And some of the really good and great books have been made into movies.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's always a debate, Should you make your kid read the book before they see the movie? I don't think there's a categorical answer to that.
I think it definitely depends on the book and the movie.
Yeah.
I can give you an example. And listeners, if you have not yet read The Scarlet Pimpernel and have not yet watched the movie, I highly recommend that you treat yourself to reading the book first because there's a twist in there that is given away too early in the movie. So it's really important, that kind of thing. I was really angry when I watched the movie after having read the book to all the people who hadn't read the book first because they missed out on that surprise.
Well, and movies, by their nature, are grossly shrunken versions
Sure.
of the book they came from.
In most cases.
Unless you want to make a 16-hour-long episode of Pride and Prejudice,
Right, true.
you have to cut out so much. So
Right.
the problem of the movie maker is, what do you cut?
Right.
And that always kind of hurts people who love the book.
Mm-hmm. True.
Now, I'll go the other way on this, though. I do think there are some movies
Mm-hmm.
that are an excellent introduction to the book.
Yes.
And specifically, I would say Shakespeare.
Yes.
So it's a little different because I don't think Shakespeare ever imagined that someday people would just sit around reading the plays.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't have made sense, I don't think, to him and the people that worked with him to write those things. But we tend to do that, whereas that's really hard. It's hard to get the visual imagery because you've got 0 descriptions
Right.
It's all dialogue.
Right.
And if you're not familiar with the history of that time and place, you can't get images to go and build the narrative in your mind. If you see the movie first, well, generally it's not a shortened version
Right.
because it's the complete play.
Did he do it
often.
line for line? Yep.
And you have the costuming, and you have the scenery, and you have the nuance of the vocalizations that are all adding to the experience. And you also can get the storyline better.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go and read, if you are going to do that someday, go read Hamlet.
Right.
It's a whole much better experience, right? So that would be one example. I can think of a few examples where I didn't know the book existed. And I saw the movie, and so I was inspired to read the book because of having seen the movie.
Yes.
They're not always the same name, too. The one comes to mind is one of my top 5 pictures. I mentioned, I think at one point, there's probably only 5 movies that I would watch again and again and again. One of them is The Scarlet and the Black. And it's the story of Father Hugh O'Flaherty, who was a Monsignor, a priest, in the Vatican during World War II.
Oh, wow.
And so the Vatican was neutral territory. So he was protected, but what he was doing was running a kind of an underground railroad to help Jews and captured prisoners and people who the Nazis were trying to get, help them escape by means of his underground network of people. And he used to dress up in various costumes when he would venture out of the Vatican. So the Nazis sent kind of a real cutthroat SS captain to shut this thing down. And so the story is really this character study, in a way, of this Monsignor trying to help people to freedom and not get caught in the process, and then this Nazi officer trying to stop him. So in the movie, Father O'Flaherty is played by Gregory Peck, and the Nazi officer is played by Christopher Plummer.
Oh, we talked about him the last time.
Yeah, so you have these 2 master actors.
Yes.
And the subtleties of interaction there. And this movie had to have been made not too long after The Sound of Music, because Christopher Plummer looks quite young, And so it's this, intrigue and trying to catch. I would be careful for any child under maybe 12, because there's a little bit of a brutal scene where the Nazi officer has someone executed by firing squad. But other than that, so at the end of the movie, this Nazi officer comes and begs the Monsignor to help his family get out of Italy because the Allies are coming, the war is ending, Italy's going to be occupied, and he's not going to be able to get back to Germany. But he wants his family. And Father O'Flaherty says, why should I help you? You've done nothing but try to kill me and interfere with me and oppose everything I stand for. Why should I help you? And so they separate. And then later, at the very end, he discovers that indeed his family is safe. Now, that's the end of the movie. But I was so interested in this story when I discovered that it is a true story.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
I went and read the book, which I believe may be entitled The Pimpernel of the Vatican.
Oh, so like the Scarlet Pimpernel, but not...
He's sneaking in, trying to help people get away from... And so here's the beautiful epilogue that's in the real story. This Nazi officer is captured and sentenced to life in prison. He was a horrible guy.
Yeah.
War crimes.
Yeah.
One man visits him every month after month, year after year, and that is, of course, Father O'Flaherty.
Wow.
And guess what? He becomes a Christian in prison. This Nazi officer is converted.
Wow. Yep.
So, that's interesting because I didn't know the book existed, and I probably never would have. The movie was so compelling that I thought, oh, what's the real story?
Right.
And, of course, there are many other differences and compressed time and all that. So I can think of a few movies that would inspire maybe a person to find books they wouldn't necessarily have found.
So have you ever read a book, enjoyed it very much, and found that the movie rendition of the book was intolerable? I know you have because you've mentioned it before. Shall I say which book it is?
Well,
or which movie
yes,
it is?
I think, yes, it's The Hobbit.
Yes.
Right? It was funny because I tell that story in my talk, Nurturing Competent Communicators, about how I read The Fellowship of the Ring out loud to the whole family. And then we went to see the movie and it came out in the theaters. That was such a big deal.
Yeah.
That they were making, The Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings.
And The Fellowship of the Ring was a wonderful story, pretty closely followed the book as much as it could.
That was the idea. We're going to read this before we see it. And then, of course, over successive years, we got The Two Towers and then Return of the King. And then we got it on DVD, extended version. And then you could have an 8-hour marathon of Lord of the Rings. And then I think the fateful decision, let's go make The Hobbit.
Right. Now, The Hobbit is probably what, 200 pages?
Yeah.
Where The Lord of the Rings is probably 6 times that?
The total.
Right, total.
But let's not just make one movie of The Hobbit. Let's make 3 Hobbit movies.
Yeah.
Since you've got to go to all the trouble of building Hobbiton again.
Which you visited when you were in New Zealand.
I did, and getting the New Zealand Army to, build your road again and letting them be the orcs in the movie. And
the New Zealand Army were the orcs.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
this is one of the points of trivia that I learned when I visited Hobbiton. Because they built Hobbiton for the first movie. And then they were done. So they restored it. It was this sheep farm, sheep and cattle farm. They restored it to its natural condition, more or less. And then they said, we're going to make movies again. We got to rebuild this. So the owner of the farm said, okay, this time let's build it nice and leave it here because people come from all over the world just to look at my farm because the movie was filmed here.
Nice.
And so they did. So I guess Peter Jackson, the owner of the farm, kind of went into business together. And so now it's a pretty significant tourist attraction in New Zealand. But so they made that movie, and I was very disappointed with the first one. And the second one, I was so nauseated that I simply flat out refused to even consider seeing the third one.
So to this day, you have not seen the third.
That is correct.
Yeah, there's so much deviation from the original story,
and
so much
in a way,
embellishments.
I wish I could unsee, But, those were books I grew up with. And
So, Andrew, what they did with The Hobbit is they did an expanded Unit 3 model. Is what they did.
With, I don't know, more like a expanded Unit 5 with way too many pictures.
Way too many pictures. So, we'll probably get some feedback from our listeners who loved The Hobbit. But
well, that's fine. You can love it. I don't criticize anyone. I do wonder, though. See, if you read the book first, it imprints images in your memory, the images that are built by the author and translated by you in your imagination. And those are strong. Book is a slow thing to do, right? To read a whole book takes a long time. And so you're contemplating these images over a much longer period of time. A movie has much less impact than a book if you just see it once, because you just go see it 2 hours, you're done. And you see enough movies that you really don't have a whole lot of opportunity to revisit those images. Now, there are some movies that people watch many, many, many times. I think Princess Bride may fall into the category of, especially in the homeschool world, in the maybe 2000s. I think people watch that movie so many times they could meet at a debate convention and just act out whole scenes, having memorized the dialogue of it just for fun in the hallways, So that had an impact because of repetition. But your normal movie, you see it, you forget a lot of it. A book, though, you contemplate that over a longer period of time. Now, if you read a book, it gives you images, and those stay with you for a length of time, maybe not forever. But what happens when you go see the movie? Well, do the images in the movie replace or overwrite the imagination?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think they do. Like when I think of the book that I was talking about at the very beginning, The Scarlet Pimpernel, having watched the movie multiple times, Jane Seymour was the leading actress in that movie, versus reading the book multiple times, probably more than I've seen the movie. What I see in my mind is more than what I see in the movie.
Okay, well, that's nice. I mean, that's a good one. I'm imagining, though, that a lot of kids who might have read the book and then see a movie, it might overwrite that.
Oh,
You read the book when you were younger.
Yes.
You saw the movie when you were older.
Yes.
So that might have something to do with the book images being more dominant.
Right.
Because, your absorbent mind of youth.
Yes.
I had a similar experience with Jane Eyre. I read the book, but not as a young person, as an old person. And then the movie was just really disappointing.
Oh.
Also, Anna Karenina. That was the modern one. Was just really, really bad. So what I noticed after seeing the movie was this struggle in my mind to try to reject the new images so I could hang on to the old ones.
Right, right.
So it's kind of one thing about The Lord of the Rings I would comment on. I was reading a review in kind of like a theological magazine. I think the author of this review made a very astute observation. I've contemplated this many times since. He said this. He said, imagined evil is more attractive than real evil. But real good is more attractive than imagined good. So when we have a movie, we're making the evil more attractive and the good less attractive because we can't do it the other way, right? So we see the evil. I think, horror movies or something in this genre, there's something a little bit seductive or voyeuristic about this. If we were to see that evil in reality, we'd run, we'd freak out, right?
Hopefully we'd mentally block it out because it would be so terrible.
It would be so terrible. But in a movie, you can actually kind of like watching the orcs.
Well, it's softened because it's just pretend.
Yeah. Whereas on the other side, I remember reading about Rivendell and the descriptions of Rivendell.
Yes.
And the movie couldn't come close. There was no way to portray artistically the reality of my experience of Rivendell from Tolkien's writing.
Right.
And so I've thought about that a lot. Real good is more attractive than imagined. And so in a way, Tolkien's Rivendell is more real than Jackson's Rivendell.
Interesting.
See what I mean?
Yep.
Imagined evil is more attractive than real evil. Also, Tolkien doesn't go into huge descriptions of the ugliness.
No.
Whereas the movie gets you pretty down and dirty with orcs and trolls.
Yes, in Mordor. So when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that there were a few plays that you had discovered that you didn't know existed. So I think plays and movies probably in the same field of visual arts as opposed to literary art. What's your experience in, say, Les Mis?
I want to shift that because we only have a few minutes left.
Right.
Rather than plays, musicals.
Okay, great, yes.
Because musicals have an ability to convey something beyond simply dialogue of words.
True.
They have an emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
You loved The Greatest Showman.
I did.
And of course, without the music, that would not have been a very impressive movie.
No, it wouldn't have.
What is it about the music? It opens up our capacity for shared feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So if a character is experiencing angst
Mm-hmm.
and they sing about that angst, you feel it more.
Right.
If they're experiencing love and they sing about that love, you're drawn into that a lot more than if they're just talking. So the first time I noticed this was with a musical, Little Women.
Okay.
When we were in California back in the O's, we had a homeschool theater ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
And the first musical we did was Cinderella, Rodgers and Hammerstein. Well done, easy to get, pretty easy to do, relatively small cast. And it was a success, and all the kids wanted to do it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I looked for a musical that I thought would have good literary value. And I found out there's musicals from all sorts of books you wouldn't have imagined. From Wuthering Heights to The Scarlet Pimpernel to, of course, we all knew about Les Mis at that point.
My boys were actors in Les Mis when our high school
Really?
production team
Oh,
did. Yeah.
what a great thing to do.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that. That was a little beyond our little group. But I did find this musical of Little Women.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I knew the books, having read them to the girls.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed was that while the musical was just a very short, excerpted, the ultimate summary where you take some of it and leave most of it.
Yes.
But the songs allowed for a much richer experience because they conveyed that emotion a lot more than if it had just been a play. And I find that fascinating. I find that effective music. In fact, I will sometimes, when I'm driving, listen to Broadway musicals of books that I know. So I love Jane Eyre. I've read it a few times, taught it to kids. And there's a Broadway musical of Jane Eyre.
Mm-hmm.
So while I despised the movie version, I'm completely enamored with the musical because it takes you through the whole story, not with all the description, narrative, and dialogue, but with all the emotional and character development changes that occur.
Yep.
And so that's fascinating to me. As a kid, I kind of did not like musicals because my mom would drag me off to West Side Story or whatever. No, please.
Right. Yeah.
But as an adult, I've really enjoyed them a great deal.
Great. Well, Andrew, thank you for allowing me and allowing our listeners to get a peek into your soul, as it were, and get some feedback on perhaps some recommendations for a few movies, but more importantly, just understanding better of how we can serve our children and help them to be well educated.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcasts. Until then, on behalf of Andrew Pudewa and the team at IEW, I thank you for the privilege of allowing us to partner with you on your journey toward better listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking.